We've got news coming in just this moment that the International Olympic Council has set the ball rolling to lift India's suspension after the Indian Olympic Association finally buckled under pressure. Headlines Today has been carrying on an expose for nearly a year, exposing double standards by Indian sports administrators. Stung by Headlines Today's stories and left with no choice, the IOA finally amended its constitution. That's paid off dividends for Indian sport. The IOC meeting was held today in Lausanne in Switzerland, and the stage is now set for Indian athletes to once again participate in Olympic accredited events.
My sense is that there's a very strong feeling in the session.
In fact, Headlines Today's stories were, Headlines Today's reports, as we told you, were among those factors that led to the IOA buckling under pressure. The lifting of the suspension in the IOA was among the first things on the International Olympic Committee's agenda as it met today in Lausanne. That's exactly what happened. The return of Indian athletes to Olympic events now a mere formality. Siddharth Kochar is with us from our newsroom for more on this story. Siddharth, a heartening development really for Indian athletes.
Development, Paya, because this is just phenomenal. This is the day that Indian athletes have been waiting for over a year, because you have to remember 4th December 2012 was when India's suspension came into effect. Since then, Indian athletes haven't been able to compete under the Indian flag in IOC events, and that's been the biggest problem. Because you know what motivates an athlete is actually playing for the tricolour, and that's something that they haven't been able to do for the last year. Now what has happened is, with the IOC welcoming the move by the IOA to amend its constitution, it set the stage for India's return into the Olympic fold. It's a mere formality. The IOC has said once you hold the polls on the 9th of February, which is the date that the IOA has given, as per the newly amended constitution, which means that you keep the likes of Abhay Chautala and Lalit Bhanot out on the 9th of February. You hold polls, fair elections in the IOA, and it'll be India's return will be set. India will return into the Olympic fold. So that's a massive story here.
It certainly is. Siddharth, do stay with us. Boria Mazumdar, the Group Consulting Editor for Sports, is also with us right now. Boria, for viewers who are just tuning into this story, explain what was going on behind the scenes and why things came to a pass.
You know, they sort of asked me a question that will take a long time to answer, but before that, let's first sort of contextualize the developments. One, the IOC Executive Board met in Lausanne this morning, and the meeting continued right up to this point in time, which is about 5 o'clock in Switzerland at this point in time, 5:30. What did they decide? They have decided that India's return to Olympic fold is now a mere formality, provided, one, the IOA will have to hold the polls on 9th of February, as Siddharth just said, and will have to amend its constitution like the way they have suggested. So the amended constitution and proper holding of polls based on this amended constitution on the 9th of February. So unless the IOA reneges on its promises made on the 8th of December, India's return to Olympic fold is now a formality. What does this imply? The question you asked me. This implies that three people, according to age and tenure clauses, the Secretary General, the President, they will not be more than 70, which means Randhir Singh, post 9th of February, will no longer be the Secretary General of the Indian Olympic Association. Two, Abhay Singh Chautala cannot contest as President. Lalit Bhanot cannot contest. So the top three, so far, Abhay Singh Chautala, Lalit Bhanot and Randhir Singh will not be part of the reconstituted IOA on the 9th of February 2014. And on that basis, the International Olympic Committee will readmit India within the Olympic fold, allowing India's athletes to compete under the tricolour. We promised you that on Headlines Today we will be breaking this story, and as we had promised in the morning, we have done that. You know, the meeting was going on in Lausanne. It was important that we bring you the news as it breaks. The fact of the matter is, Olympic return now a formality, provided the Indian Olympic Association follows up on its promises and amends its constitution like the way it has proposed on the 8th of December and follows up with the polls on the 9th of February.
Let me come back to Siddharth on another point, because Siddharth, we were talking earlier this evening as well about the kind of competitions Indian sportspersons have missed over this past year because of the IOA's reluctance to amend its own constitution. Give us a sense of exactly what kind of competitions we've had to forfeit.
Oh, we've had to forfeit a number of competitions. You have to remember that boxers have been barred from competing in international events. The World Championships in September were the last event that they competed in. And since then, and even then, it wasn't under the Indian flag. It was under the IBA flag, which is the international body for amateur boxers. And it was under the IBA flag that they competed in World Championship. And since then, there's been a blanket ban on boxers competing. What has happened to wrestlers if they've been invited to invitational events and they've been sent back since then? None of the other athletes, so to say, have been able to compete in international events under the tricolour, which is the single most motivating factor for most of our athletes, because you have to remember that it is the image of Abhinav Bindra standing on the podium and the tricolour being raised absolutely the highest in those three flags that were there in Beijing 2008 that motivated an entire nation. And that's a scene that hasn't been witnessed, because tricolour is not even featured in any events under the IOC flag for almost a year now.
Let me go across to Boria on another one. Boria, at the heart of some of this was also questions about corruption and whether the Indian Olympic Association, by not having anti-corruption clauses in its constitution, was sort of brushing these complaints under the carpet.
Absolutely correct. You know, the whole issue about charge-sheeted officials not being able to contest elections, rather charges framed against officials not being allowed to contest elections. The IOA dragged on the matter for a long time. You've seen what happened with Abhay Chautala and Lalit Bhanot. Finally, and this happened for close to 6 months. From May onwards, they were dragging their feet. Finally, when they realized that the IOC is absolutely hell-bent and the IOC would not buckle down this time around, the IOA finally succumbed to IOC pressure. There was a lot of factional infighting going on within the top brass of the IOA. The Lalit Bhanot, Abhay Chautala camp and the Randhir Singh camp. Even at this point in time, Randhir Singh is in Lausanne. There was a lot of doubt as to whether these people will see eye to eye, whether these people will place self-interest above national interest, and they have been continuing to do so for the last 1 year. It has been relentless campaigning by the IOC. A lot of people from behind the scenes, I cannot take names, a number of athletes, Abhinav Bindra and a number of other Indian athletes have played an important role. The sports ministry has played an important role, led by Jitendra Singh.
Boria, I want to interrupt you because I'm told that we have Mr. Trilochan Singh of the IOA speaking with us on the phone right now. Mr. Singh, the IOA finally having its suspension lifted by the IOC, which comes as good news certainly for athletes.
See, firstly, when you ask Trilochan Singh, tell him very clearly the suspension will be lifted provided Trilochan Singh and his counterparts in the Indian Olympic Association follow up on their promises. Amend the constitution, hold polls like they have suggested on the 8th of December. Yes, it is a formality. Provided they follow up on their promises, Indian athletes will be back in the Olympic fold. But like the question you asked, there was a lot of infighting. The Indian Olympic Association dragged its feet on the issue of corruption, on the issue of charges framed against particular officials. The IOC refused to buckle under pressure. The IOC refused to see the logic being provided by these people. The IOC was hell-bent that they wanted reform. The sports ministry under Jitendra Singh was hell-bent that it wanted reform. One needs to highlight the role played by Foreign Secretary P.K. Deb. One needs to highlight the role played by the Minister Jitendra Singh. He went to Lausanne along with Abhinav Bindra and a number of Indian athletes like Malav Shroff. These people played very significant roles in getting India back into the IOC fold. Several of them have not come into the forefront, but backstage they have done yeoman service to Indian sport. It is time to celebrate the contribution by these athletes, Abhinav Bindra and company. It is time to celebrate the lead taken by Minister Jitendra Singh. In fact, we are awaiting within 1 hour. Let's tell you what is going to happen. Within the next hour, the IOC is going to issue a press release. Within the next hour, you will see a press release outlining what Headlines Today is bringing to you up front. That the IOC Executive Board welcomes the move by the Indian Olympic Association to amend its constitution and toe the IOC line. And tomorrow, a formal letter will come through. Thereafter, we will also speak to the sports minister, trying to find out what he thinks so.
We'll see exactly how the story develops with Boria. Siddharth, thank you very much for bringing in this breaking news. Headlines Today reporting among the first to report that the IOC has agreed to lift its suspension on the Indian Olympic Association if the Indian Olympic Association Now to an event that had the world in its audience really this whole afternoon. Nelson Mandela, a giant of the 21st century and the 20th century. Before that, certainly a man who stood for peace and social justice, was given his final farewell at a stadium in Johannesburg. Tens of thousands of people paid tributes to him and that stadium, singing and dancing and celebrating his life. They were joined by more than 90 leaders from across the world.